Good morning. Hemshech Ayin Beis, volume 3. We are on page 1325. So we finished the paragraph on page 1325. To sum it up quickly, briefly, talking about the second level of transforming the Gevuros, or the words he's using now, ban, the yesh, the cheshach, the darkness, the yesh into ayin, the bittul of ma. And this is coming from ma, which is rooted in the etzem, in the which has in it, it carries the atzmi because it's rooted in the metzach, in the forehead. Yetzem mitzcha da'ak, the forehead of ak. So like the glow of the face is revealing to us, but in a concealed manner because it's blocked by the very garment of the forehead and the face, revealing the inner essence within. And the avodah of tzaddikim is to reveal the gili of Shema that's concealed within. La'asad love, in the future, this will be completely revealed to the point where the yesh will be like the ayin. It's total transparent. Today, you can't say it's mamish, the yesh will be like the ayin, because there's still something of a yesh, there's still some garment. But it'll be transparent. That's like a taste of what will be in the future. And he distinguished in the future will be in the whole world. Now the tzaddikim do it primarily in their part of the world, even though it affects the rest of the world as well. And secondly, in the Asad Lave, it will be on the highest possible level as it is in its root. Whereas now it comes down, though the man in its root on Shabbos doesn't come down on Shabbos. Why? Because in the root, it's completely in a state of non-existence. But now we're talking about in existence, we should experience something that's beyond existence, that's in the yesh, we'll feel that experiencing the ayin. And that is what the tzaddik does. That's also the eating of a tzaddik as he eats, l'seva nafshe, to satisfy his soul, like the man. And all this is revealing Shema bli levush, which is similar to how it will be in the future in l'asad lave, with the distinctions I just spelled out. So Shema on its own is only passing through, and it's concealed by a garment. And the tzaddikim reveal it in a revealed way. So on its own, the soul, like the divine soul, the soul is ma and ayin, but the body and the animal soul is not. And the avodah is that also the physical body, and this is how it is by tzaddikim, becomes saturated with the ayin of the neshama. And this means that the darkness is transformed to light, but it's light. Transformed to light. So it is transforming the darkness, the yesh. It's not avoiding it. It's not above it, but it's still on the terms of the ayin. Let me just put a little more context to this and be a little more helpful to understand. And then it'll prepare us to get to the next stage that we're going to learn in the new paragraph. So you may recall, when he's discussed earlier, in general speaking, the way the structure of existence is made, and I reviewed this a number of times, many times, is the Eibishter, in order to create an existence that is an independent consciousness, what we call a yesh, that we should feel that we exist and that we have an independence to us outside of God. That required the tzimtzum. The tzimtzum concealed the divine, like we learned earlier. So even though Elokus is the essence of everything, but it was concealed. What remains is the yesh. So before any Aveda, we begin our lives feeling like a yesh. That's called tachtenim. And the goal is to make a dira b'tachtenim, to take the yesh, and through contemplation and through work and through Aveda, like we learn mutfa, murgish, muskel, to climb the ladder, retrace our steps, and reconnect with our Creator, to the point that it's revealed within us and all the different levels, so I'm not going through right now. But generally speaking, you could say there are three stages here. Stage one is the yesh before avodah. So it's the ban, and the ma is concealed within it. But now you want the divine soul, the shema, the neshama, that leads to stage two, the avodah, of reversing the process, of revealing within the yesh, within that ego, within the self, the egocentric consciousness of life, of a human being's life, to reveal the divine. And there are many levels. There's a Beinani, there's a Tzaddik Sheina Gomer, there's a Tzaddik Gomer. These are all simple levels. These are all basically levels of how much you're revealing. So by Beinani, there's a war. The war is going on, but he's in control, at least on a behavioral level, meaning thought, speech, and action are under the control of the divine soul, but not the rest of him. The feelings, the thoughts, the ideas are always there, and he's constantly fighting. A Tzaddik Sheina Gomer, we learned, has won the battle, but is not fully transformed. And then there's like similar to the first level of sweetening the Gevuros. And then comes the second level, which is the Tzaddik Gomer that does transform, simply by the sheer power of the soul. Now, what is accomplished? The yesh has now been sublimated, has been refined. The question is to what extent? So the ultimate we've reached so far is that it becomes, just like he says, b'shava mamish, to the ayin. So till now, the body, till this avodah, the body had its own agenda, self-indulgence, its own. But especially by a tzaddik gomer, the body has become aligned. Whatever the soul wants, the body wants. Now that's a big achievement, because initially it was a yesh that had its own independent agenda. Like even Adam and Chava wandered off the reservation. They didn't follow orders, and their independence led them to eat from the tree of knowledge, which separated them even further from their divine consciousness. So the divine within them, let's call it their divine purpose, and their lives became a dissonance, disassociated, misaligned. A perfect system is when your body and your behavior and everything about you is aligned with God's purpose. Or the way I put it usually in very simple language, that who you are is what you do, and what you do is who you are. In other words, your neshama is the captain of the ship. It's guiding your body, and your body is simply a vehicle for what God wants that the neshama is conveying to you. So so there are levels of how much that to extent. Like I said, by a Beinani, there's a battle going on. So at least on some level, there is a success. But you can't say that you've impacted the animal soul, really. What you've done is you keep it at bay. You keep it under control, tamed. By the Tzaddik Sheina Gomer, he sweetens the Gevuros, which means the animal soul has been subdued, has been neutralized, but not been transformed. That's why he doesn't despise evil fully, and he has not transformed at all. It's like what he said, it's chesed, rav chesed. It's coming from arich ampin, so it doesn't transform, but it definitely impacts. And by Tzaddik Gomer, it's full transformation. But what's transformation mean? That the body is now aligned with the soul. The vehicle is doing what the captain of the ship, which is the soul, wants it to do, which is what God wants it to do. So it's a transformation, but it's a transformation of Ma'ila Lamata, because the neshama has gotten the body to comply with it. Like he said here, the whole explanation behind it. Like the Torah has the power, machzir le'mutav, to bring back a person from sin to goodness, from bad to good. Or the power that he said of Matan Torah. Or the face of the king, like we're talking here, the Metzach. The face of the king causes the prosecutor to become defense. What was not been achieved is that the transformation did not happen from within. It happened from without. The neshama caused the body to be that way. But you may recall that there's another new stage. There's a third level. In the context I just said, I spoke already 3 levels. There's another level. And that is when the body is not just aligned with the soul, which is already a tremendous achievement. Like he said, V'nigla kved Hashem, v'ro kol basar, that the flesh itself will see godliness just like the ayin. So it's true today, it's not mamish like the ayin, it's still, there's some yesh, but l'asado will be like the ayin, but there's another level. When the basar will actually feed the neshama. Where the neshama today is sustaining the body will sustain the soul. For that, you have to reveal in the yesh, in the gvura, something that chesed doesn't have. All this is the neshama aligning the body. But for the body to be able to sustain the soul, the keva to save of gover, and Eshes Chayla Teres that Malchus is not just aligned with Zoh and with Bina and so on, but is mashpia into them. That's going to require revealing the Helama Atzmi. That's higher than Chesed, even the highest level of Chesed Da'atik. Because till now, we're revealing the Etzem through the Metzach, through the forehead, from Chesed into Gvura. But then there's something even higher than that. And that's going to be what we're going to learn now, which is the transformation that ultimately leads us to a place where the Yesh actually, in many ways, feeds the Ayin, not just is equalized with it, and is not just a transparent vehicle and channel. So it's important just to put it into context. It's going to be an even higher level, even than the Tzaddik Gomer in a way. So we'll see, we'll learn inside, we'll see what he says. But this is based, even though usually I don't say what's going to come afterwards, but because we learned this already. He had said all this much earlier when he spoke about the full Einoid, that where the body feeds the soul. So I go back to what pages? It would be quite a while back. We said it already. Page on page 1286, I see. But I wanted to go back even further back, where this is really discussed. I'll point it out later as we learn further. As we learn further, I'll point out where it is. Oh, here, bottom of page 1276. There he says it explicitly, what I just said. So in La'asad Love itself, it's a higher level. It's a higher level that's not just the Yesh and the Ayin, the Ban and the Ma equal, but the Ban has something, the Yesh has something that reveals from the Helam Atzmi that's even higher. It says the Nefesh Yikabel Er V'chayis Ma'guf. The Mila of the Keli over the earth. So not just that the Keli is aligned with the earth, but that the Keli reveals something that the earth doesn't even have. And that we haven't discussed for quite a while, till back in 1286, 1276, 1277, that was discussed when he talked about the Rishimu being higher than the Kav. But it's all going to come back to that ultimately, because now he moved on to the sweetening of the Gevuros. And now this is all going to lead us now to understand the Yesh Eifen Gimel, a third way how the Gevuros are sweetened. And this is now going to be not through Chesed. So I know this is the day everybody's been waiting for, this theme, but as I said a number of times, you can't understand this, and you definitely can't reach this without going through the stages before. So that's what we're going to do now. And before I continue, anybody have any questions? Okay, so we're starting a new paragraph in middle of page 1325, and goes like this. The pages can be found at ayinbeis.com if you want to follow along the Hebrew text. After what we've discussed, and this is now going back from the top of page 1316. We're at 1325. So around 9 or even 10 pages ago, when he began the discussion of the two methods and two types of sweetening, he says, Yesh Eifen Gimel. There's a third method. There's a third type. And he alluded to this, just for the record, he alluded to it on page 1318. One second. Yeah. So there's a third way, a third method, a third type. Bam Tokas Gvuros, in the sweetening of the severities or judgments. And remember, Gvura includes everything: Choshech, darkness, Yesh, Malchus, the Nefesh Habam is the animal soul. All the things we've talked about. And what is this third way? Shagvuros nimtokim mitzad atzma. That the Gevuros get sweetened mitzad atzma. from within themselves on their own. Not through the means of chsadim. Till now, we've been talking about chesed, either overrides or outnumbers the sweet waters, the bitter, or it's such a powerful chesed that transforms, but it was all through chesed. He made it very clear. Like on page 1322, Kol zal yidei chesed, he said. And the same thing when he spoke on page 1318, made it very clear, it was all through chesed. Now he's saying it's not through chesed at all. It's coming from Gvura itself. And now he defines it. V'hu. And this third level, this is the primary, true sweetening. This is what we say, that Gvuras are not sweetened only in their root, meaning the ultimate sweetening. We know we could sweeten Gvura through Chesed. But when it says Eina Gvuras nimtoken ela b'shorshan, he means b'shorshan ha'atzmi dafke, in the core source of Gvura itself. Now this statement is from Kabbalah. It was quoted earlier right here on the top of page, before he started the whole topic here. Let's just refer to it. On the top of page 1307. If you look in 1307, that's when he first brought it, when he brought about the sweetening of the water. So he asked the question, you do it, the gvuras einim taken el b'sharsha. So then we have to understand, he said, so what's the difference between sweetening it through chesed, even eitz achayim? That's not total sweetening until it comes from the source of Gvura itself. So there was a question. And now he's coming back to explain it. So that's the top of page 1307. He's now referring to it. So this is what it means. The Gvuras are not sweetened only in their root, meaning in their core, very core root. That doesn't mean they can't get sweetened. We've learned already that they could, the first two ways. But this is the ultimate, like he calls Iker Hamtoka Hamitis, the primary and true sweetening. So now we're going to understand and explain this. I'll get a record. He did discuss earlier that the Kalim, he didn't use the word, I don't think he used the word Gvuras back then, where I mentioned on the bottom of 1276, but he definitely used the word Kalim and Guf, and even Shemban, I think, even someplace. But bottom line is, now he's going to explain it further, and this ties in with what we learned earlier, and I'll bring it together as we continue learning. So he made a statement now, but he's not going to explain what is this type of sweetening. Because the obvious question is, so what makes it get sweeter? If it's Gvura, why doesn't it remain Gvura? What suddenly causes it? In the first two, you could say, because you bring in another force. There's bitter water, or Gvura, din, judgment, darkness, whatever. You bring in light, you bring in chesed, so chesed sweetens it. Either in the first approach, that it simply outnumbers it and overrides it and neutralizes the bitterness, or it's such a powerful chesed that transforms it. But there it's very clear, it's a force outside of it. Here, the obvious question is what makes the Gvura, so why, here there were suddenly judgments, and how they suddenly become sweetened. What's causing them to be sweetened? What is the Sherish Atzmi that we're talking about? So this is a very critical question. It's like saying the animal soul is refined by the divine soul. It makes total sense. There's a battle, and the question, who's going to win the battle? So you could understand that Moyach Shalta Alev in a Beinani, and by a tzaddik even more, obviously in a whole different level, where the divine soul conquers the animal soul. But if you take away the divine soul, how exactly is the animal soul going to come to recognize God? It has its own interests, to put it in Avaidadika terms. So this is going to be a big part of the discussion. And obviously, as we're going to learn, you can't get to this level if you didn't have the first two. But now he's going to describe what is this level like that's coming from the Gvuras themselves. Now, I'm sure you could already assume that's connected to Baal Tshuva, it's connected to Tshuva versus Tzaddikim. But let's not jump the gun. So I'm going to read inside. He's going to explain it now. He's going to bring Ketoros, which is the incense in the Mishkan and the Beis Hamikdash, the Ketoros was a Mizbeach HaKetoros, Mizbeach HaKarbonos. Karbonos is where it's like the animal soul, where you're bringing, like you said before, you bring makriv of carbon, and Ketoros is incense. It burned quietly, and it's not the refining of the negative, but it's, as we'll see in a moment, is going to be a refinement. That's the example he's going to use, Ketoros. The Yuvanzeh will understand this transformation, this third level of sweetening that comes from the Gvura itself, from the Sheresh Atzmi. We're going to understand it from Me'inyan HaKetoros. From the Ketoros that were brought, the incense that was brought in the Mishkan, in the Beis HaMikdash, basically. And of course, on Yom Kippur, it's a primary service, the Avedis HaKetoros in the Kodesh Kadosh. The Yadua B'Zeiru B'Kisva Arizal. And I see he's going to bring the Ketoros was a big topic in volume 1. There was a whole section where he spoke about Ketoros, which is incense essentially, meaning the aroma of the Ketoros is the main force, because you don't consume it, you don't eat Ketoros, but you smell its beautiful, beautiful scent. So he says, the Yadua B'Zoyar B'Kisva Arizal, it's known in Zoyar and the writings of the Arizal, the Inyan HaKetoros, who am tokas HaGvuros b'shorshan. That the Ketoros, what is the Inyan of the Ketoros? What did it represent? It represented the sweetening of the Gvuros in their root. What he's talking about here. Not through chesed, but from within themselves. From Gvura, from the b'shorshan, in its root. So when you reveal the root of Gvura, it sweetens the Gvura. V'ayim ashen is bar le'il, dibra maskol halalu ba'drushim she'achreze. So here too, you see how much he's citing. Doesn't just say the mimer, he says also bedrushim she'achreze, which tells you it was a big topic. So this is back in volume 1, and page 424 and on, where this was discussed. And it's definitely helpful to look there to understand what the Ketoros are. But let's continue reading. I'll bring from there when I feel it's necessary to understand what we're learning here. So that's what Ketoros are. That's the general symbolism, or the general personification of Ketoros is the inyan of Hamtokas HaGvuros b'shorshan. We'll soon understand what that means. V'hamtokahi shenimtokim mitzad atzmon dafke. And this sweetening is that they get sweetened on their own, not through a force outside that imposes itself on them. Ukamoya Ketoros atzmon, like the very Ketoros themselves. The Ketoros were made of Yud Aleph Samamane HaKetoros. They were made of 11 different species. I don't remember them all offhand, but I do remember frankincense, and there's a whole bunch of them. If someone wants to look them up, it's fine. It's not going to be relevant to know all of them, but they're essentially different spices that give off a very powerful scent, and there were 11 different types. So he's saying, so what were the Ketoros themselves? How were they made? There's a whole process of how they processed Ketoros. So it says, Harihein dvarim charifim. The Ketoros are sharp items, meaning charifim b'yeser, very sharp. The einon dover meichel, and they're not a food. It's not something you can consume and eat. It's like a perfume, very powerful perfumes. Adarabah, on the contrary, hein kamei samim hamazikin lenefesh. They can become samim, like toxic, that will cause damage to the nefesh. I assume he means if you consume them, if you eat them. So they're made from like you make perfume. You take very sharp smells. It could even be the smell of a skunk. As a matter of fact, I believe that one of the musket is mushak. It's actually where the name mushka comes from. So mushak was one of the incense, as we're going to soon learn, different types, that comes from something that's actually a very unpleasant odor, like it is with skunks and others, that you remove the toxin, and then you leave only the beautiful fragrance of a perfume. So these are dvarim charifim b'yeser. They're not something to be ate, and on the contrary, on their own, they could be samim, azikim, and nefesh. The nasim, psomim, they become an incense. They become psomim. They become, what's the other word what I use besides incense? Spices. Spices, shemerichim reach tev v'chazak b'yeser. That give off, shemerichim, that smell very beautifully. They give a reich tev, a very good aroma, and a very good and strong aroma. Mitzad chrifusam v'kashiyosam dafke. It's not due to their sharpness, because they originate as sharp and harsh smells, that when processed properly, they will give off a beautiful sharp smell, a beautiful, powerful smell. So like when you say a thing that doesn't have any real power in it, not for the negative and not in the bad, not the negative way, not the bad, not in a good way, so it doesn't give off a strong fragrance. But if it's a strong fragrance, they're saying is it came from initially being something strong that can go and smell very bad and even be destructive. And here they've been turned into a beautiful fragrance, beautiful psomim, spices and incense. U'kamoi kain, it's also ruchnius like this. This is begashmi, so kamoi kainu inyan akteris beruchnius. And so too it is with Ketoros and the spiritual dimension of it. Shulahamtik kol hadinin hakoshin is to sweeten all the harsh judgments and severities bisharsha in their source. Shenafachim l'teiv mamish, that they become transformed to mamish, to good. V'ushara nepach l'teiv mamish, and that's when the ra, the negative, becomes mamish, essentially, fundamentally, and completely transformed to goodness, unequivocally transformed to goodness. And the example I gave is a very good example, because you can have something, even, I think today, even in medicine, and maybe someone can give a good example, that a medicine that heals and could be a tremendous healer can come from something before it was processed and properly extracted, can come from something that would be destructive and actually dangerous. So you have plants and you have different types of herbs that if you just consume them on their own or in some way, this can actually be destructive. But when you know how to extract some of the ingredients and the chemicals and direct them properly, that itself can become the greatest elixir or healer. Anybody has a real practical example of that in medical, herbal, or any other like plants or stuff like that? I'm sure there are. I remember reading.
Foxglove, which is digitalis.
What is that?
It's a common garden plant that contains digitalis. Just a second, I'll tell you what it does. Give me 1 second. It's most commonly used for heart failure and to remove for congestive heart when there's fluid in the lungs because of a bad heart. Chemicals taken from foxglove are used to make a prescription drug called Jacobson. It's most commonly used for heart failure and fluid buildup in the body and irregular heartbeat. So foxglove contains chemicals for which the prescription, these chemicals can increase the strength of the heart muscle contractions, change heart rate, and increase heart blood output. But if you eat it, it's poison. Okay,
good example. Exactly. There are many. I think a lot of the very powerful drugs and medicine that's used. I think even is it not correct that homeopathy is extracting something and using the very virus or the very germ to heal it or something like that? It's also something similar. Or antibiotics work that way. No?
Yeah, I mean you can say certainly mold the penicillin. That's a good example. But homeopathy is a whole different thing. It's like using likes, and it's really, when it comes down to it, the strongest ones are only you can't even find the substance, and it's in a vibrational setup. I think it's a little hard to understand through homeopathy. Penicillin is a perfect example on mold. You take a mold, it's toxic stuff in molds, but in penicillin, it saves lives.
Interesting. I always wondered about yogurt, where they said, that that what is it? Even yogurt, yeast, not yogurt, yeast. Anyway, okay. I think finding a few good examples. I'm going to look up. The mushak is for sure. The musket.
Snake poison.
Okay. And what do they make from it?
Antidote to the poison that if you get
the snake venom. Yeah, correct. That's good. Yeah.
Well, here's a bunch. The yew tree is so poisonous that eating a handful of it can kill a person. Yet a chemical found in yew bark has proven to be an effective anti-cancer medicine. Sweet wormwood is a source of a widely used malaria treatment. I just mentioned foxglove. The opium poppy has yielded potent medicines for pain relief, but of course can be dangerous if you eat too much of it. It goes on. There's things from spiders and snails.
I think when it comes to the Ketoros, I think the musket is the one, mushak. I don't think he's going to. Is he going to bring here? Yeah, he's going to bring the chaya raw. Yeah, you know what? There's going to be more on this soon. I was going to cite it that one of the 11 spices of Ketoros, it actually comes from an animal that's called a chaya, from an impure animal, and yet it's turned into this. Okay, you get the idea. So now let's continue learning. Thanks. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, so a joint effort here. Shezeu ha'hefresh. Let's continue. This is the difference between korbanos l'ketoros, between offerings and the spice and the incense. The korbanos hem gam ken bechinas reach. Korbanos, besides the fact that they're actually the offerings, animals, or other types of korbanos, they also have a connection to smell. The aroma that they give off, that God's, the aroma that they so they have aroma. However, this is an aroma, a fragrance that comes from a food, from an object that can be eaten. Like food has a, you cook chicken, or you so on, it gives off a smell. Ketoros, however, is an aroma that comes from something that's not edible. So it's a spice. Yeah. So it doesn't mean that something that's not edible is necessarily evil. It means if you eat it, it's not good for you, and it could even be damaging for you. It's not meant to be eaten. So though the korbanos also have a smell, but it's a smell for something that you can consume. So it's not quite toxic. Here it could be toxic, like some of the examples you just gave. That's toxic in any other way, but it's being used for something of kedusha. So you've transferred something toxic to become something that is positive, that is healthy, that is a ketoros. And remember, avodas ketoros is a mitzvah in the Torah. So it's not just a nice smell. It happens to be a ketoros that expresses a deep level of avodah, which he has not spoken about yet. What the avodah of ketoros is, he just talked about the transformation that is hamtokish and hamtokish mitzad asmam, hamtokish hagvuros b'shorshan. So that's what the ketoros represent. Yeah. It says in Chassidus, that's why it's Yud Aleph, by the way, because the spheres are 10, not 9, not 11, because Kedusha is the round number of 10. Yud Aleph represents the makif of Klippa, and Ketoros represent the transformation of Klippa. The Rebbe speaks about, Chassidus speaks about it in a number of places. Mitler Rebbe in Teres Reish, especially the Maimorim of Yom Kippur. And the Rebbe brings it in many times regarding his own birthday, Yud Aleph Nisan, that Yud Aleph is like the level of Keser. So on one hand, it can be negative, but on the other hand, it can transform and be higher than the Shtalshlus. Just for the record, 11, he may bring this later. So 11 also represents this transformation part. Okay. Ube'etz Chaim Kosav, Rebbe Rashab adds in parentheses. In Eitz Chaim he writes, it's written, Shezeu achayis de gedusha shebetecha klipa. That this is the level of chayis of gedusha that's within the klipa. In other words, every klipa has to have a spark of divine holy spark, especially klipas nega, but even Shol's klipas atmeis. Here he says betecha klipa. I'm not sure which one he means. It could be even the Shal, but everything has to have kedusha. So the Rebbe Rashab explains it's not a contradiction to what I just wrote. That it's that it transforms ra. Because based Eitz Chaim, then he's talking about the chayes of kedusha. He says achzeu achayes shenivla b'seichel. However, this divine energy has been swallowed, has been absorbed within them. In other words, it's concealed. Like was discussed earlier about this. Or earlier may be the Maimorim that he referred to from volume 1. Or maybe not. He may have mentioned it earlier here and even in volume 3. I don't recall now. I think maybe something was mentioned, but as well, that could be somewhere earlier. So in other words, what the Eitz Chaim is adding is that there is chayes. There's a chayes of Gedusha, but the chayes nivla literally means like swallowed up, like absorbed. They're like there's buried within it. So that is the level of Ketoros. Ukiyadua, yeah, he's going to bring now the moir. Ukiyadua b'habayis manikre moir, or mur. How do we pronounce it? Mur or moir? Moir. Like he's going to give one of the examples of one of the incense or the spices. The one that's called mur. Shumhudam chaya hanikre Yadua, Shenepach Ba'atzme Vanasa Beisam Tev. It's the blood of an animal. It's coming from the blood of an animal that's called Yadua, that was transformed on its own and became a pleasant and beautiful fragrance. Okay, let me give you some background on this. This is going to bring from some Maimorim that talk about this, and there's also an halacha that discusses this. If you don't mind, I want to just bring, there's a sikha from the Rebbe that I actually prepared. This is spelled out in detail, so I just want to cite it from there inside. So just a moment, I'm just bringing a sefer here, 1 second. Was it Memtes? 1 second, please. To find it. I think I found what I'm looking for. Okay. I'm looking at this is when the Rebbe spoke in connection with Chav Beis Shvat. I'll just give you some background. This was the yahrzeit of the Rebbetzin. So her second name, Chaya Mushka. He discussed the name Mushka it comes from mushak, from musket. It's a psalmim. I'm looking at page 297 in volume in Sefer HaSichos Tov Shinun. So for bringing from Yisrei Tov Beis Shvat, 1990. So the Rebbe discussed then the name mushka, and he said it comes from the word musket and gives off a beautiful fragrance. So he brings there, so I just wanted to go straight to what's negated to us here. 1 second. And I see the Torah air that the Rebbe Rashab cites here is also brought here in detail. So 1 second, give me a moment. That mushak is the targum of the word mur, which is one of the 11 spices. The quote is exactly in Pashat Kisisa Lamed Chav Gimel. Can someone look up Kisisa in Shmois 30:23 and see how they translate the word mur there, if you don't mind, while I read this? 30:23. Okay.
It just says Mar Dror, and it just translates as Mur. It doesn't say any more than that.
Mur. Yeah. The question is, I think in Aryeh Kaplan's. Okay, so let's just read inside here, and I'll do some more research. I'll come back with. In Torah, he talks about it. What?
You said that Merhu Dam Chaya Nikra Yadua, that it's from the blood of something living, but myrrh is a sap-like substance, a resin that comes out of cuts in the bark of certain trees.
No, there are two opinions. The Rambam holds it comes from an animal. The Ravid holds it comes from a plant.
Uh-huh. Did you want me to look at the source of what animal the Rambam says it comes from?
If you find it quickly. If not, I have sources. I have to look it up. I don't want to take more time now.
Okay.
It's brought. It says, yeah, here clearly there's one opinion. It's the Ravid holds it from a plant, and the Rambam holds it from an animal, and others also. There's the two opinions. What it is. Yeah. Okay. So he says it comes from an animal that's transformed from the blood of an animal. The yesh deya, there's actually an opinion. Shamuta ba'achila. You're allowed to eat it. V'inyane beruchnius. And what is it in ruchnius, on the spiritual level? Who? Shazdenas nasim kazachis. And ruchnius, this is referring of the transformation of zvenus, deliberate sins, to merits. Like you said here, the transformation from the negative to the positive. Like he says in Torah in the Maimer Chayv, it's a Purim Maimer, the second Maimer. So there he brings that. Yeah, two opinions. That's very clear. Okay. V'hu inyan hatshuva. This is the inyan of tshuva. The bali tshuva amitim. This is the inyan of tshuva, of true bali tshuva. Now, what does he mean by true bali tshuva as opposed to what? Doesn't mean false. He means the highest level of bal tshuva, like he spoke about earlier. You may recall, he said, tzadikim and bali tshuva amitim. He mentioned that expression also earlier. Where was that? I think that was close to page, if I recall correctly, page 1318, maybe. He definitely brought that expression. Tzadikim and bali tshuva gemurim amitim. Okay. Nafsham, that comes from the depth and the innermost part of their soul. The meridas atzuma, with an awesome or tremendous bitterness or pain. Al eitzem rechukam, on the fundamental distance. That when they feel very deep in their hearts and souls, they're shaken to their core of how distant they are through their sins. God forbid, shemismarmer benafshe, that in his soul he gets embittered. At shemoyes bechayev mamash, to the point that he despises the way he's been living his life. Mamash. Sha'idezeh, this extreme regret and remorse and pain of the distance from godliness, through that alone, that pain causes that causes him to be a total metamorphosis, to be transformed in his very core essence, from total evil to teiv mamish, to literal complete goodness. This is not like the work that we do with the Yetzer Hara, with the evil inclination and the animal soul that comes al pitam v'das. Remember, avos elam, that you contemplate. There you're dealing with a far lower level. She'ein zeh be'etzem hamahus. We learned earlier that does not change fundamentally the person. That just so-called tames and subdues the animal soul, but doesn't shake someone to the core. So when a person, for example, the animal soul is pursuing its own indulgences, and through your contemplation, that you start contemplating and explaining to the animal soul, it's good for you to be close to God. God is good for you, good for your health, it's good for your life. So there it affects it, like we learned on the bottom of page 1320, but it doesn't change its etzem mahus. It doesn't fundamentally change it because it's not been shaken to the very core that should cause this type of total metamorphosis of a true Baal Tshuva. That's what he's saying here. Mashenkin idea tshuva, but through tshuva, the one we're talking about, nepach be'etzem mahusei, his whole personality has been fundamentally changed. So it's one thing that the divine soul is training and educating and enlightening and inspiring the animal soul. It's another when it's coming by hitting rock bottom, basically. He doesn't say the words rock bottom, but essentially he's saying that the person has gotten so distant that he's so embittered by it that he completely despises his life because of where he's fallen, that is what really awakens him. So it's not that the light of that divine soul has awoke him up or made him aware. It's that something in the darkness itself, he's come to realize this is, beyond. It's like like an addict who comes to realize his life is totally out of control and he's hurting himself and everyone around him. So it's not because he had some epiphany or because there was some revelation. It can sometimes come from a total, the darkness was so intense, you suddenly realize, it just reminds me of a story maybe I'll tell it another time. But the guy called David Carr, he was a writer for the New York Times. I think he died a few years ago. He wrote a very, very scathing, a very sharp book about his own addictions. It was called The Night of the Naked Gun, I think. And I'll just share it because I remember it. So he writes how he was basically a coke addict. And he had a girlfriend and they were doing everything. Very destructive. What's worse than coke? What's that very addictive thing that you go to these houses, they do it.
Opium, heroin.
No. Crack.
Crack is cocaine.
Yeah.
It's a methamphetamine.
An extreme form of coke, yeah. So he was a crack addict with his girlfriend and so on. They had children, and unfortunately, as he writes, anyway, once they had children, he thought, okay, I'm going to calm down, I'll relax, it'll be a responsibility. But then he had one day a bad day, and he was home alone with two children. I think twins, maybe not twins, I don't remember. Twins, maybe. And he had a craving. He needed to go to a crack house, but he has the children with him. What's he going to do? So he decided in his own delusional, when a person is crazed, he decides he's going to drive to one of these crack houses, and he's going to leave the babies in the car. He'll do his thing, and then he'll come home and go home. It was a very cold day, so he had to leave the car on. I know it's going to sound quite chilling. And he put on the heat, so the children should be warm. And he thought 15 minutes, when you're in delusional, of course, it wasn't 15 minutes, it was hours. And he didn't even realize what time it was. He comes out after he does whatever he did, he comes out of these crack houses. And he walks into the car, and he's still in a stupor. And suddenly realizes the car was completely smoked up because of the heat. And he was like, and he came running to the car to see, because then he remembered he had his two babies in there, his twins, children like babies, literally newborn, a few months old. I don't know how old they were. And he opens the car and they're both sleeping and they're both alive. He was sure that after, he realized who knows what could have happened. And he writes, it's the way he writes it is so devastating. He writes, God doesn't give people. It just brings me to tears when I say it. He says, God does not give people more than one chance. And he realized he had realized what he's doing. He literally could kill his children. And it was like, then he writes how that changed him and so on. So it's a whole book about the topic. It's very well written. He was a very good writer.
What's his name?
David Carr, C-A-R-R. Anyway, I think it was called The Night of the Smoking Gun. The Night of the Gun, maybe. Night of the Gun. Anyway, it just remained with me because I know it sounds odd to bring that here into Ayin Beis, but it was just, to me, an excellent example of total darkness. Because it wasn't like someone told him, hey, you have children, wake up, become responsible. He had to hit the place where he literally almost killed his children. And it was just a powerful example of this. So the point is that it's a different type of, you're talking now from within, and that's what he says in Torah, that this is this transformation. And not like the beard of Yetzer Hara, which is essentially a process, gradations. But this is be'etzem ha'mahus, be'etzem ha'huseh. I think one second, let me just see how he continues here. I think we'll stop here. We'll continue tomorrow, but he's going to say that the primary part of this tshuva is that it's coming from the animal soul itself, who feels tsar, feels the distress from the place he's arrived, from the place he's fallen to, I should say. Which is far, far more powerful than when it comes from the divine soul. So he's now going to compare when the animal soul itself gets awakened from its deep distress, in contrast to when the divine soul wakes it up, or the divine soul's feelings. which of course is where the oyer, the chesed, is affecting the gvura. Here he wants to give the example of the gvura itself from within. So Ketoros is now the operative example. I'm going to look up more about the more and see exactly what he means. The Torah Air explains it in detail, so I'll give more information tomorrow in the class tomorrow. So I'll stop here, close to the bottom of page 1325, and we've entered this this third dimension, this zone of transformation from within, and coming from the root, because ultimately that's where it has the power to do so. Because ultimately it means that how could the animal soul get such awareness? It means that it has something deep embedded in it that can wake it up from within itself when it hits the right rock bottom, when it hits rock bottom. So we'll stop here, but I'm happy to take any questions if anybody wants to comment or questions.
Just real quick, you wanted to know which animal this more was Rambam was referring to, and it's referring to a musk the musk from a male musk deer, which is an aromatic substance which exudes from a gland on the male musk deer. And Rambam says that following a lead from Rav Sadia Gaon.
Yeah, that's exactly what he says in the footnote here. That mushka is musk, comes from musk, and the musk is connected to moir. That's according to the Rama. The Ravid and some others hold that it's that moir is a plant.
Correct.
Different opinions, fine. Yeah, correct. That's consistent with what he says here. Okay, good.
Rabbi Jacobson, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so here's the thing. The way I'm understanding it is there's two aspects to be considered here. One is the ingredient that's embedded in a particular substance, or as we're talking about as a mashal. But then there's another aspect of as to how you extract this ingredient. So what I'm saying is like what brings to my mind it's a parsha tetzaveh that it says that you have to crush the olive, katid lamaor. You crush the olive, and that's how you get the essence of it to be able to light up the menorah. So it's sometimes the very substance that's embedded, but also it's the process as to how to extract this so-called ingredient.
It's a good point. Here he doesn't mention the process. Here he just mentions the substance. But it could be in Torah that he quotes from the Alter Rebbe. There may be more discussion also on the process. So it's consistent. The process is also through a crushing, through like hitting rock bottom. We get crushed. He does say mismarmer benafshe, which means that he gets embittered. He's clearly his life is crushed in the sense where he feels miserable. He feels terrible about it. So he doesn't specifically say it's the process, but what you're saying is consistent with what it says here. Yeah, they're both correct. Both the very substance is coming from a negative place, and the process is also coming from a crushed attitude, not from revelation, but from the opposite, from being broken. Yeah. So it fits. And also, he's not finished yet. Let's see. I'm not sure if there's plenty more. He's going to talk about this at length here. I see Ketoros, it goes on for a good while. So he may even go into these details. Okay. Anybody else want to add anything or comment or questions? So if not, we're going to stop here close to the bottom of 1325.